This is Keyed In with Max and Brent, unlocking the minds of the industry's top real estate professionals. And now, here are your hosts, Max Rabin and Brent Jackson.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Keyed In podcast. I'm Max Rabin, and this week we have Lauren Davis back.
We are back.
Lauren, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I heard it was a special request. The fans have been wanting more.
Absolutely.
Just kidding.
Remember,
just
it's
kidding.
the voice. It's the voice.
It's
the
the
Lauren
voice.
voice. So
Yes.
soothing.
So soothing. Not as soothing as Max, but thank you.
And this is a kind of a different thing. You brought your husband with you this
I
week.
did. We are flipping the theme of the podcast. You know, we've done a lot of interviews where you guys interview agents or brokers.
Right.
And I think everyone has a very interesting story, but I think one component that you all have not touched on is this job tends to bleed into your personal life. I mean, we work weekends, we work nights, and who's keeping the rest of the household or life on track? And so I brought the, biggest supporter of my business and
And the apple of your eye.
the apple of my eye.
This is Steve Mytinger. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So Steve is a former software sales leader. He also has a business consulting firm, Precision Sales Consulting, and you are working with all kinds of different industries in terms of consulting.
Yeah, all kinds. Software, professional services, a lot of home services. So I definitely work with businesses that you'd be familiar with.
So we like an origin story. How did you guys meet? What's the love story?
I'm going to let Lauren tell
here
it
we go.
because
No.
her version is a little different than mine. And when I tell mine, she doesn't usually like it, but it's good.
Oh, interesting. We both worked for the same company. I was based in Washington, D.C. Steve was in San Francisco. We worked for PR Newswire. And we were at a sales conference in Arizona. And I had arrived and I was sitting by the pool with a friend. And the San Francisco crew rolls in. This is the 90s, Max. And they're grungy, cool hipsters. And they walk in, and I see them as a collective. I don't really notice anyone individually, but you can't. They're either Seattle or San Francisco.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
So, no big deal. Noted. Hours go by. We have to sit down for a formal dinner. Sitting at a table, if this had another half to it. And I'm sitting there talking to my friends from DC, and Steve pops down where you are. And he says, "Hi." I said, "Hi." He said, "Sorry about earlier." I said, "What are you sorry for?" "I was staring at you at the pool." I'm like, "Excuse me? You are creepy. I did not see you staring at me. Like, I have no idea who you are.
This is the
I don't
opening
know."
line.
That was his opening line. And it made me sort of half creeped out and half laugh, but we got to know each other over the weekend, started as friends. And when I went back to DC, well, actually, one little anecdote, we were supposed to have breakfast together before we left that weekend. And he took an early flight, which is a very Steve move. Took an early flight and he was like, "Sorry, I can't do breakfast." I said, "Okay, no big deal, fine." So I get back to DC, and a couple days later, a FedEx package arrives. And it's a package from Steve that is coffee and coffee mugs for my team. And he said, "Sorry about that, breakfast on me." And so that's how it started. I don't know if his aligns with that. Is it a line?
It's roughly compatible to my version.
Okay.
We'll stick with that.
Okay.
Keep that one on the record.
And our first date was months later. We, because we had been talking, it was totally platonic at first, but we got to knowing each other. And our first date was, I was going to be in New York for training. And he's like, "I'll meet you at the end of your week for, in New York City, and we'll meet up in person." I said, "Fine." So he arrives. He's like, "Good news, bad news." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Our first date's going to be for 10 days. And I was like, "Excuse me? Why?" And he said, "They need some extra help in DC. So I'm going from New York to work in your office for the next week." So the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But
I guess you guys got along.
We did. And so we dated for a long distance for a year and a half. And then I transferred out to the West Coast. And that was during the tech boom.
Okay.
So we were out there together for about 3 years before we came back here.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
You've been together a long time.
Oh my gosh. 26 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or is it wonderful? It is.
It is.
It's tough. Relationships. I'm in a fantastic relationship now. Definitely the longest relationship I've ever been in. I don't know. Finding the key partner is probably one of the most key important things in your life, if not the most important thing. Having that sort of like feeling settled, that knowing that person's there, and knowing that you're not out like fending off or fighting like out here in the world, in the dating world, all of that, I find to be just super comforting. And I don't know. So just a quick segue. My current partner, who I've been with for 5 years, she has 2 daughters, and she, the interesting thing is, like, at first I was like, her sweetness and niceness and just her overall being is what I was gravitated towards. The kids are like a side effect, right? They happen to be incredible kids, just luckily, right? But it's just, I don't know. There's just something about like, the comfort of all of us together that makes everything else just easy in my life. That's hard to explain.
Yeah, it's similar to when I met Lauren's first family. That was tough for me to get my mind around, but it works out great now. We don't see them much.
What? What do you mean you're the one who has the other family in Denver, Colorado?
That is the joke.
Yes.
I used to work for a software company that was based in Denver, and I was there enough where people thought I worked there at that office. So there was definitely some suspiciousness about what I might have been doing in my off time.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
That's the other family. Truly.
Well, okay. So let's just talk about, Steve, your coaching and sales methodology. You're working with different types of industries. Tell us about your methodology, and what is one of the main things, for example, when people come to you, what are they looking for? What's the big help? What's the big ask?
It's a good question. It's all over the map. I should say first, I've been exposed to many different methodologies, but at Precision Sales Consulting, we use Sandler. I always tell people we're the least Sandler people you'll ever meet, and sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's a bad thing. But it's putting together a lot of different experiences. I was in software sales for a long time. The founder of Precision Sales Consulting has been doing this for 9 years. He was in medical device sales for quite a while, and he also sold a microfinance business. So we have a background in actually doing it, whereas a lot of consultants, Sandler in particular, it's they've grown up with the Sandler methodology. So I think it's just helpful to have a bunch of different perspectives. As far as why people come to us, it's different things for different people. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as my salespeople can't sell, right? And then you have to figure out, what does that really mean? What are they actually doing, and where are they having trouble, right? So that's kind of the easy one, because they're starting at ground zero. It's like, revenue was great and now it's not, but what can you do to help? And then still other people are like, well, we don't have a formal sales process. So we'd like to start doing what we do, but doing it more formally, right? And so you can kind of blend the methodology of Sandler, which is nice because it kind of plugs in anywhere. If you already are doing something, you don't need to tear it down and start over, right? It can fit into what you're already doing. It's pretty malleable. So just to document, so things like sales playbooks, or documenting the process to the point that they can have sales stages and have it fit into their CRM, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's kind of runs the gamut from simple sales training facilitation to, a lot of kind of deep, dark process work, which for some reason I tend to like, just the nuts and bolts of it, and understanding how people do what they do and why they do it, and figuring out where you can kind of plug in and optimize things.
So I'm not familiar with Sandler Consulting. So you were mentioning like it builds off of that methodology. What are some key factors to that we're talking about?
So I like to say with Sandler, it's less about the what do I do and more about the how I do it. A lot of the methodologies, several of them that I've used before, I don't want to say it's paint by numbers, but it's like these are the things that you do, and you check those off and you move it through kind of a hierarchy. Whereas Sandler is much more humanistic. So it's based on a lot of psychological principles. It's more in these times of AI and the bots are going to come get us at some point. It's still two people having to sit down, have a conversation, and figure out, is there potential here for us to work together, right? And that's really, to me, what Sandler helps with.
This sounds very much like the ninja sales methodology that we use in real estate. You're probably familiar with it.
I have heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously, there are the old days of Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, where it's like ABC, always be closing. It's like, here's your quota. Like, that's the classic, like, sales, like, boiler room, right? And then in the ninja training philosophy, it's more humanistic. And it's like, it's affirmations, starting with positive energy, so to speak, and then bringing that out into the world and being a human, being a good person, essentially, right? So it sounds similar in that way.
It is very similar. Yesterday, I had a speaking engagement. One of the things we talked about was just be a human. In today's world, if you can take your sales hat off, sometimes it becomes so adversarial, right? You have a goal, you want to be successful, you want to make money, and you're going into a situation where somebody could potentially award that to you. And I think that colors our perception a lot of times, when it's really like, how would I handle this situation if I just met this person at a party, right? I don't have to like them, but I can have a good conversation with them. So it's really just remembering, like, we're just having a conversation, especially the first time out. We're just trying to see if there's a fit. And if you go in with that attitude and actually express that to them, people they let their guard down. Like, you even say, hey, I'm not even sure we're the right provider for you, but I'd like to learn more about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And at the end of this, we'll decide, is there anything here to even talk about further? People, you would be surprised how much that lets the air out of people's tires, and they're just like, okay, wow, we can talk.
Yeah.
You know? And that is definitely a very Sandler thing.
Well, obviously, your wife is in sales, and very successful business, by the way, as you're aware.
I have heard.
Yeah.
She does okay.
She does okay. Okay, so you're listening to real estate stories all the time. That's part of the reason why you're here. Is like the other person that has to deal with the real estate BS that we like live through. What are some of the things, like, she's put together an amazing team. Were you helping in that process? Like, were there people that she may have hired at one point where you're like, that's probably not a good fit? Like, what are some of the things that you've done?
I don't get involved much in the personnel. That's sort of evolved over time. What I will say is, yes, I do pick up things here and there that we do talk about. So one of the things that we've talked about recently is, and probably over the last year, and it's gotten so much better, is just this idea of doing free consulting, right? You're such an expert, you're such a trusted advisor that you're going to get calls from people who really just want that information, right? And so you have to be, I don't want to say guard against, but you have to be careful about how much of that stuff you share. You want to give them just enough where it's like, wow, this is the person I want to work with. But it's like, if you give it all up to them and they go out and sell their house themselves, like, that doesn't feel good, right? So we've definitely had talks about, what does your ideal market look like? What does your ideal customer look like? And, do you want to be the one to go in and give them all the information and have them not work with you? It's almost like you want to set it up where it's like, I don't care whether you work with me or not, but here's the way I do it. Mm-hmm. And what's come from that is that her people are now gravitating towards her, right? The people that are ready to do something, they tend to be professionals that are smart, they have their own careers, they're very busy. They don't want to do it themselves. They don't even really want to be involved. They want to say, you've done such a good job, we've seen this house and we've talked to these people, we just want you to do it, right? And those are her people, right?
It's like the path of least resistance.
Right.
He can see that. Like, if I get off the phone, sometimes I'll hang up and he's like, that doesn't sound like your people. Because if someone is fighting you from the beginning, he's helped me recognize that maybe it's better to move on more quickly and decide that they're not a fit for you than spin your wheels or waste your time with them. And then sometimes he'll just catch the tail end of a conversation and I'll hang up the phone and he'll be like, oh, those are your people. And he doesn't know who I'm talking to. He knows my body language, my response, and what they're saying. And it is true. It's like, to tell you a story, I have a family friend. Well, one of my best friend's parents are getting ready to sell a house, and it is not in a neighborhood. I hope they're not listening. It is not in a neighborhood I normally service. It's a beautiful home, but it's not in an area that I am the expert. They want to work with me. I have never seen someone throw in so completely. I went and met with them and they said, we are so glad you are here. You are the expert. You are going to guide us. We will do whatever you tell us to do. And I said to Steve, I have never wanted to work harder in my life because I want whoever I decide to work with to. And so he has helped me identify that over time. I mean, our sort of sacred time and time when we are able to talk about these things is Our daughter leaves for school around 7:15 or 7:30, and then we walk our dog into town for coffee. So it's kind of like whatever's going on, we kind of address in that. And so I am able to sort of talk through some of these dilemmas or having to make decisions. Is it the right fit?
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about a couple that I'm working with right now, and they called me for a listing appointment in Navy Yard, which is an area that I'm familiar with. And I was like, so how did you find me? And they were like, your mailers. I'm like, oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Like it works.
Right.
And this is a younger couple. The wife's about to have a baby. They have a big dog. They've outgrown the condo, and they wanted to buy like the classic suburban house. Their budget is not Edgemore budget. Okay.
Darn.
Right. but I know what, $1.2, $1.3 million buys you pretty much anywhere within 40 minutes of DC. So I'm like, we're just going to examine all of it. I just immediately connected with them because I saw what they were going through, and it was just a great first meeting.
Well, they trusted you to help them.
Right.
And doesn't that make you want to?
Absolutely.
Right. And then you do run into the people who, from the very beginning, want to challenge your process and your methodology and your way of doing things. And it's like, is that the best client for you?
Right.
So
one of the techniques for sussing that out, if you're not sure, especially if you're in person, you can say, would it be helpful if I shared with you in what situations people tend to have a successful outcome with me? And then you give them all the things that you value in working with the customer. And it's like the voice of the customer is saying that, you're not necessarily saying that, So I don't suppose any of that sounds like you, or what do you think of that, right? And you put it back on them, especially when I keep thinking of that guy that, gave you that flat rate offer, right? And that's the only way I remember it. But it's kind of like,
this is so I'll tell the story and then Steve can elaborate. But I got called in on a listing appointment in Kenwood for a very nice house, and they offered, they think with all this NAR stuff that they can negotiate all sides of listing, side by side, everything. Okay, it's opened up the
Sure.
Pandora's box, and he wanted to offer me a flat rate on the listing side, and I was like, sir, I just want to let you know I'm probably making more money on the listing side these days. Like, I'm not looking to get a pay cut, but that's beside the point. But Steve had to hear me talk to this gentleman, so I'll let him take it from here.
well, it's just funny when you actually get to the point where you feel like you can say to people, you know what, I'm actually not a good fit for you. And I did this the other day with somebody, and people are floored. Like, wait, you don't want to work with me? I mean, I told them up front that might be one of the outcomes. But this was the same situation where you told the guy, yeah, this is not going to be a good fit for me. And he pursued it. Like, he really wanted you to be the one to take this particular setup.
Yeah, he tried. And it just still was not. I still felt the path of resistance with him, and it was not.
Did he get to the point of coming around saying like, okay, I'm open to paying a percentage commission?
Yes,
and
yes,
you were, at this point you were kind of like,
yeah, but I don't think we were going to meet in an area that I felt comfortable, and I felt so much resistance. I'm like, if we're resisting on this point, we're going to have resistance on everything. I'm thinking photos, I'm thinking showings, I'm thinking every step is going to be difficult, and I don't feel the buy-in.
We have enough experience to know exactly,
Right.
Yeah.
And so it is nice to just say it out loud and verify those things with someone who understands the business, having been with me for 22 years of me doing my career. So I have that built in. But so the fine line is, there's so many times where I'm sure that he could solve the problem by, telling me the answer to the problem. He doesn't do that, and that's because we're married, right? And so it's kind of like when I come home with any sort of problem, you don't really want your husband to give you the answer to the problem. You just want them to listen and commiserate with you. So he rides a fine line. But I do think he asks the questions, like, well, what do you think? And it is helpful to have somebody that you can bounce those ideas off of.
I mean, I agree. Sometimes it is tough though. I get advice coming to me and I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah, like, I didn't want that.
Right. And it's like,
yeah.
But then it's not wrong. Right.
We call that shoulding all over people, and make sure you pronounce it correctly. But think of that person where every time you see him, you're like, I like that person, but every time I see him, this is what happens. Hey, have you been to this restaurant? You really should. You know why? Because here's this, and that. Are you listening to this podcast? Oh, you should. You don't want to do it because they're telling you to do it. Like, it's just natural human instinct to push back.
This is like a cousin of mansplaining, I think.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can figure out a way to get the information and do a context that people will absorb it in, you're much better off. So I mentioned this voice of the customer thing. It's like, here's what people say about us. I don't know if any of that resonates with you. Instead of, these are all my features and benefits, you're like, this is what my customers, this is what my people say.
Right.
If any of this sounds interesting, we can dive into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I lifted directly from your bio that you hone your negotiating skills with your teen. You guys have one daughter.
Mm-hmm.
How old's your daughter right now?
15.
15. So perfect.
I can't even believe I just said that. It sounds so weird.
I hear you.
She's in some ways so grown up, and in other ways, such a little kid.
Well, I mean, I have a 14-year-old stepdaughter. As I mentioned, I've been with this family for 5 years now, so I've seen her go from like the sweet, spunky 9-year-old to being like, I don't even know what you would call it, like a little scary.
I know what you would call it. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. And now she's sort of coming around again, though.
Oh, good.
No,
That's an early come around.
Yeah.
That's good. Ninth grade.
No, I mean, she's like,
Yeah.
she is taking her school more seriously. She has a boyfriend, which I did not really authorize, but it just occurred. And I don't know, no one consulted me on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But what in terms of negotiating, her negotiating tactic, which is probably an incredible tactic to use for all of us, is just assuming she's already won the negotiation. Like starting off like I have an idea for something that I want or something that's going to happen, and it's already done. So any pushback on that, and then it's as if she doesn't care, which is another great tactic. It's like, well, wait, isn't there's a give and take here?
She's a master already.
She's a master.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with your guys' kid?
I mean, it's things like curfew time. It's things like, can I get a ride? It's almost everything, right? And then sometimes she'll just say, because I'll ask the questions back to her, so if I gave you a ride, what would you be willing to do, right? It's kind of like a give and take. And she doesn't play that game. She's like, Dad, stop Sandlering me. I just want to know, can you give me a ride or not? She just wants to get to it, but it's, when we're talking about curfews, then that's really high stakes stuff, right? It's like, she always starts at like midnight. It's like, well, that's out of the question. So can you give me another offer and we'll kind of work from there? So it's down to 11, and then we arrive at 10:45 or 11:15 or 11. Dad, come get me at 11:07. So it's the classic, there's that book, Never Split the Difference, but we're always splitting the difference. We're always trying to win.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that, listen, this is nothing against my realtor brethren and sistren. Like we've all got our own like weird lives out here. But I feel like everyone needs to live with a teenager at some point.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like to find out what and remind us what we are probably like.
I know. It's brain development. You're watching it before your eyes. It's fascinating. But Steve and Georgia are particularly close, I think, for a father-daughter because, like as I mentioned in the beginning, I have to work on the weekends. I'm not home some nights. And so ever since the day she was born, Steve was really the primary caregiver on the weekend, and they were best friends and holding hands and going to the park and going to the farmer's market. And so the teen evolution is a little hard because it changes that dynamic. And now it's more like, Dad, when are you going to pick me up? Dad, can I order DoorDash? Dad. And so that's a difficult transition because they were so close and because he was such a part of her life. But I feel like it's the foundation has been built, and she understands what a loving man is in her life or a loving partner is in her life. And so the work is done, in a sense. And that's sad to say, but he understands that it's a transition. It's like, you have given your stepdaughters, he has given our daughter a loving figure in their life and an expectation for what someone will be there for. And so I know that it's huge. And I had the same dynamic with my dad because of, my mom being in the business, and it's amazing. And I think, for women doing this business, you really do need a supportive spouse and someone who's willing to step in. And, Steve used to play golf, doesn't play golf anymore because he couldn't be gone 5 or 6 hours on the weekend when I was working. He had to be Mr. Mom. So he's been an amazing partner to help support my business on the household front as well.
Going back to the consulting hat, all right. So in terms of our listeners, and I wish kind of Brent was here because he goes through lots of ups and downs with his team, right? But if let's say you're an agent and you're starting to achieve better sales and you're thinking about developing a team, putting together a good sales team, what are your top advice? Like, what's your top advice for that? How do you start to build? How do you find the right talent?
There's so many frameworks out there. It can get super complicated. At the end of the day, hiring is one of the hardest things to get right for any business. What I would say is, and I try to keep it simple, is I'm hiring hungry, humble, and smart, right? If I have those things and somebody has any interest in doing the work that I have for them, I'm pretty sure I'm off to a good start, right? And it's hard to measure those things, and that's why I advocate for people. One, don't hire too soon, right? If you don't have the business to support it, all it's going to do is it's going to create these unmet expectations that people have. Well, I'm going to come on board and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it's like, it turns out there aren't enough leads. There isn't enough business, right? And that's hard, especially for somebody who's young and trying to break into a business. So I would say wait as long as you can, right? And then when somebody comes on board, like most people that are new to a business, they want to just get started right away, right? Let me at it, right? So then you have an environment that is, yes, they're going to learn all the back office stuff. They're going to learn the computer system. They're going to shadow you on open houses, but it's like there's actual stuff for them to do that's going to be, things they would do in the future and actually on their way to becoming an agent. The other thing I would advocate for is like kind of a mentorship. Like there's somebody in the business at the brokerage who's maybe a level up or 2 levels up, right? That they can pick their brain, they can be friendly with, they can ask questions to. Because it's one thing to have a boss, it's another thing to have sort of a mentor figure or somebody that you look to when you're just like, wow, I don't know if I've got this right. Somebody to offer some reassurance. So those 2 things are really key. Again, it is really hard to get right.
No doubt. And then you mentioned, are there enough leads? Is there enough sales to actually support this hire or build this team? What about if you built a team, you've made a couple hires, maybe you have multiple assistants, you have some other young agents, and or agents of different experience, and then you have a downturn in your market, or depending on your micro location, even in DC, you could be in Bethesda and doing gangbusters like Lauren Davis' team, or you could be on the northeast side of DC where sales have slowed down considerably, where you built your business out of. How do you deal with that when you're dealing with your team?
Well, hopefully you haven't overhired at that point, right? Mm-hmm. So you've taken this advice of like, let's only hire when we need to hire, right? I mean, I think it's this whole austerity movement of like, again, I come from software and it's like, it was go, grow at any cost. Everybody overhired. Everybody used the same system of we're going to hire 12 AEs and we're going to hire 12 BDRs and we're just going to go to market. We're going to create demand. Turns out if that ever worked, and it did, somewhat in some markets, it's not in vogue now and certainly not being supported with funding. So it's become this whole, I want to make sure that there's a market for what I do and kind of ride that fine line, right? You just don't want to overexpand in boom times, right? Real estate is one of the most cyclical things that there is, and it is fickle from market to market, as you just mentioned. So it's like you just always want to be in that pocket of, I'm stretched, right? I have enough work for all of these people, and it's like if things do turn down, probably at some point, people are independent contractors in your business, right? Mm-hmm. It becomes very difficult. And I also think with all of the regulations and things that have changed, like it's a good thing that a lot of the people that were sort of seeing this as a side hustle or this is so easy and, I can get into this business and, make a little money on the side, like a lot of that is going away, right? And so the unintended consequence I think that's happened from this is that top agents like yourselves, a lot of the business is starting to be transacting between those people, right? They're kind of cutting out the middleman, right? And it's just, I don't know that that's what people intended when those regulations were changed, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people can debate, but I just see that people like yourselves, again, you're the trusted advisor. You have the track record. Somebody who's getting into this business now, it's going to be harder exponentially than it ever was.
Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. I still get people reaching out to me directly. They see what I'm doing on social media and it looks wonderful. It looks very glorious, right?
You do a good job of that.
Well, it's all it's just something that I've like developed over the last 4 years, and you always show like the highlights.
good times.
Yeah,
Yes.
like the best of the best.
Yeah.
But I still have people reaching out, and it honestly becomes harder and harder to even reply. They're like, I'm thinking about getting a license. Like a couple years ago, it was kind of like obvious, right? Like like sales were crazy, and like everywhere you went, it was like the real estate market, interest rates, and I could see why people were interested in that. Now, when people reach out, I'm kind of like, do I even like, what do I tell this person?
I mean, I think it does come back to what Steve said, which is I really think there's still going to be space for new people coming into this business because we're going to age out of this eventually. So there will be people who really want to learn the business and roll their sleeves up. Like, I really do think there will be some successful people that enter the business now, young, hungry, willing to do anything to learn this business.
I think really good with media too. Like
yeah,
just
that's
that's
a new
strong
that's
with must.
yeah.
yeah, it is. And somebody who can work with you.
Right. Well,
Yes.
what I think is important is especially if you're at the younger generation, like let's just say under the age of 35, okay? If you're not approaching what we do from sort of a media standpoint in terms of marketing and like being aggressive about that, I don't know how you really differentiate yourself. You know, I mean, yes, you can go out there. You're going to have to go out there and hit the street and drive around and get to know your market and get to know your inventory and your product. But in order for people to even know what's going on about you, you have to build that presence. It's huge.
I've been witness to how that has developed over time for this kid, and you know, I think if flattery is what is it, the sincerest form of flattery? I'm going to mess it up, but people copy you.
Imitation. Yes.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. You see it. Websites look very similar to what she's doing. Newsletters. I didn't see a lot of newsletters.
Yeah,
I see them all the time now. Wow, it looks eerily similar to what my wife started doing, 7 years ago or 8 years ago. So I know that that's really important to a brand today, and the fact that she can keep it authentic, and I look at the stuff that she does, and it's like, there's no fakery there, right? Of course, you're showing the good times, but it's like, that's her, right? And people gravitate towards that. Like, that's just the it factor that you can't really teach that.
Lauren, for our listeners who may not have listened to another episode that was like purely about you, can you talk a little about the newsletter?
So I do a newsletter. It's probably every other month, and I do an opening letter. So it's usually a very personal letter. It's, I'll give you an example. Last month, the newsletter was about going to Nashville for the Genie, so the Sotheby's Global Conference. And I talked about getting stuck in an elevator because I'm super claustrophobic, but it had just happened. So I talked about I was going to meet some women that I'm in a networking group with at Sotheby's, and they were at the top floor, 40th floor or wherever, at this bar, and I had to get in this elevator to get to the top to meet them for a drink. And I sort of always dread the elevator. And so I get in the elevator, and it's jam-packed, and I asked the lady, I'm like, can I fit? She's like, oh, yeah, I know my number's hop in. So we get in, and it's shoulder to shoulder in this elevator, and I'll be damned if the thing doesn't stop. Okay. My worst nightmare. I'm like, I'm going to die in the elevator. My friends are at the top. And wow, this really is just terrible. And I kind of look straight ahead, and I look down a little bit, and I see Scott Hamilton, the famous figure skater, in the elevator with me.
What?
And I'm like, if I go down, at least I'm making the news tonight, because Scott Hamilton's dying with his family in this elevator. And so long story short is it kicks back on. We get to the top. I'm like, oh my gosh. But my twist and turn on this is, find the people in your life that will motivate you to get on that elevator and go up 40 floors. Because my Sotheby's networking friends, a small group that I started of 10 women up and down the East Coast, were at the top. And I was getting there, and so I talk about that, and I say, if you're reading this newsletter, there's a very good chance that I'm meeting you at the top. Like, I would get in this elevator for you, and we are here to help you. So then we tie it all in. And the rest of the newsletter was about Nashville and like where to go and where to eat, just based on experience. And then we do a house crush where we talk about a house that we would love to buy. So it was in Nashville. So we try to do something. I really put my heart on the line every letter, and so it is hard. Steve always helps me edit that. He's an excellent writer, and he always helps me edit that. I always say, like, do I have something here? Do I have an idea? And he's like, run with it.
she comes up with something every month. Like I can't imagine how hard that is to continually come up with a fresh idea. And that's, I think, in this day and age of content creation, like that's the hardest part. And people that can do it authentically and do it prolifically, like that's hard. And
it's funny because
resonates.
Agents are like, when's the next newsletter coming? Or people who live in Edgemoor in my farm, oh my God, I love that last letter. Or I went on an interview recently for a house in Edgemoor and I didn't know the owners. And we sat down, we got to talking, and we were talking maybe a half hour, and they were like, we thought we knew you from the newsletter, but we like you even more. Like, so it does come across as genuine.
Sure.
It's my number one tool because I can communicate with agents all over the country, like our peers in other markets. I can communicate with agents in this market. I can communicate with clients, like prospects, the whole thing. That the message is always sort of universal.
Right.
It ties back to real estate in some way. I always try to tie it back, but it's really a personal story. Like, I've done it when my dog died. I've done it when my dad died. Like, it's not always sad. It's there. An elevator is very sad for me.
It's always sad and terrifying.
Elevator is very sad for me. I do like. So I've done sports related ones about my daughter. Like all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But that's been the number one tool, and I really always bounce it off of him to get the
You're
ball
inspiring
rolling.
to write. Might as well.
Do it. But you've got your TikTok and all this stuff, so you stay in your lane. I'll stay in mine.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thanks. Fair.
Well,
fair.
It's not going to be the same letter. I have other things to talk about.
know,
I'll talk about the guy.
I'll
talk about the tennis tournament I lost.
Okay, fine. I'm gonna do TikTok now. Okay, fine. Perfect.
Yeah, I
Sounds
think you'd be
fair.
good at it.
No.
No. Steve, another thing that I picked up was you talk about the role of humor in leadership, in being in business. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I come at this from somebody who, when he started in leadership, was so insecure that I was completely humorless. So I just think that people gravitate towards real people, right? This leader at the top of the mountain who's dictating what happens, like so many things have changed in the world. I just don't see that as being effective, right? This whole mandate to move people back to the office to me is so funny. It's like Amazon, like one of the most progressive companies in the world in terms of the technology that they've used. I mean, Amazon's been using AI forever. Like, how do you think you get those recommendations, right? They're so cutting edge from a technology and what they're doing in the workforce, but it's like they can't articulate to you why they need everybody to go back to the office. It's like basically 'cause I said so.
Right.
And it's that type of leadership that people just, in my experience, don't respond to, right? You got to have a heart, right? And it's kind of funny. I will give a former boss of mine credit. He was the ultimate, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care guy, right? That was really all he had, to be honest with you. But that was one of the things that really got my thinking turned around to, I'm creating this environment on my team of I'm doing everything the same, so nobody can accuse me of favoritism, basically is what it was. And it's like, if you don't tap into somebody's motivation and the things that are important to them, and you don't treat everybody fair, right? Not the same, but fair, and try to understand like how that you can get the most out of them, it's like you're missing the boat, like just by dictating. So humor to me is, I mean, I think it's so important to have a self-awareness enough to poke fun at yourself, because people gravitate towards the real stuff. And I think I've always felt like if somebody's willing to poke a little fun at themselves, like I can ride with that guy or that gal.
I think of myself as being a funny person and being humorous, but in business, for a long time, I was probably too serious. And sort of a reason why we'll get to in a second. But it's like, I would always go to these appointments with Jonathan Taylor, who I still work with after 25 years, and people just like think he's hilarious. He's joking. He's always got like, he does know how to do that. Like he can just look at someone and just know almost what they're thinking. It's kind of like this intuitive weird thing that he does. And I always thought, I was like, he's so good at that, I'm terrible at that. But it wasn't even about that. It's just being like, it's more like we were talking about. It's like being yourself and just being who you are and being comfortable with talking about whatever's on your mind. And that has sort of brought that out in me in my business as well, with meeting people like cold, first meeting, not being so, I don't know, uptight about things, so to speak.
Be a human first and a sales professional second.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about something personal, if it's okay with you. Lauren told me that you're in recovery. I don't know. Everyone talks about these kinds of things differently. Me personally, I haven't had a drink in 11 years. I had a really like, it was like a kind of odd evolution in like abuse when I was in my like late 20s to mid 30s. It like, you know, what was like a normal like partying and drinking kind of thing turned into something way worse and got much worse by my mid 30s. So I consider myself, for lack of a better term, to be a recovering alcoholic in that regard. And for me, that aspect of my life, being sober now, has been one of the most important things to me, if not the most important thing in shaping, like reshaping who I am and finding who I am again. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know if you wanted to speak about that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you because nothing good happens if I'm still in that place. I mean, it'll be, 28 years on Halloween. So I got a lot in early. I was very prolific. You know, and it's not a unique story. It's just you get to the point where you're like, if I keep doing this, I will be dead.
Right.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
And, you know, at some point you realize that you deep inside want to and need to change. And I had that realization. I mean, I hit bottom a few times, but, you know, certain things happen and you just look at it like this is, at a certain point, it's just self-preservation.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, agreed. And I think that I certainly wouldn't be where I am now if I had continued. And I can't foresee a part of my life in the future. Sometimes I'm at the beach and I'm just like, what if I just started knocking back beers, you know? And it's just like, can't even begin to think about that anymore, really.
Yeah, I'm pretty far away from it, obviously.
Yeah,
but
you're further.
I am also eerily close to it, if that makes any sense at all. So every once in a while, and you probably know this, you wake up and you are replaying something that you were sure actually happened, that it was real, that you were out having a good time partying, and you wake up and it's like you're almost in a cold sweat. And it's like you're so relieved when you realize that was some sort of dream.
Yeah.
And that still happens every once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just, I think it always will.
Hear you.
I would say the one thing that I think you both have in common is from this sort of sobriety is focusing on self-care. Like you're both disciplined in what you eat and how you exercise and how you work. Like that's just one aspect of it, but having a partner and having stepchildren, having a wife and having kids, having a home, like all these things are the result of that. And it's really, I'm thankful for both of you.
So one little anecdote will probably illustrate how I feel about all the things that have happened since I've been sober. We bought our first house years ago in Spring Valley. It was the smallest house in the entire area, and it was one of 5 houses that was pretty much the same. And I remember this because when we walked in there, after Lauren had already seen the house, I walked in, and you know, after we bought it, she cried. She was walking out crying. I was like, "What's wrong?" She's like, "It's so ugly. There's so much that needs to be done." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? This is the greatest thing ever." And I remember walking down the stairs one morning after we had been living there for a little while, and I'm laughing to myself. I'm like, I never thought in a million years, if you told me 10 years ago that this is where I'd be, I'm playing with house money. Like anything from here is like gravy. Like this is awesome. And every once in a while I still have that feeling of like, you know, because I think we all need to be just a little more grateful about what's going on in our lives. Like for some people it's very hard. Every once in a while I'm just like, I can't believe I'm taking all this for granted, right? It would never have been possible. Like the juxtaposition of where you found yourself many years ago to where you find yourself now, the gulf is enormous. And you got to be thankful for that every day.
Absolutely. All right.
Are we rapid firing?
I think we got plenty.
This sounds scary.
You should be terrified right now.
Okay, this is typically Brent's job, Steve. It's the rapid fire questions, but your own wife, Lauren, is going to deliver the rapid fire.
Okay. She probably knows all the answers.
No, not really. Some of these, let me see. What's your go-to Sunday night dinner?
God, this time of year, chicken parmesan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean now I have to have it.
Now that's what I want tonight. Thank you.
Yes, we'll order it. I'm not cooking.
All right, then quick question, side question. If you order it, where do you order from?
We really don't order chicken parm, honestly.
You like it from Milazzo, don't you?
I do, but like it's kind of our thing that we make.
Okay,
But
cool.
Yeah.
our daughter has a game tonight. We're getting home late. No one's cooking. Okay.
Got it.
What is a guilty pleasure of yours?
I mean, laying around on a Sunday watching way too much football. Like every once in a while, I'll watch it all.
Yeah.
And that's rare because like I can't, my attention span has been, I guess, warped by social media where I can't even pay attention to the games. I have to watch it on Red Zone, which is like every, quad box. We got 4 games going. I would say that is definitely a guilty pleasure because you feel pretty slothy after that.
So you're like basically like 12:45 p.m. You're like settling in. And
Oh no, they played in London last week, so
Oh,
it started at like 9 o'clock.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah,
Wow.
It's rare, but it is a guilty pleasure. Every once in a while, you just lay on the big couch and just watch Red Zone for way too many hours.
Nice.
What's your biggest pet peeve about me? Buckle up.
I don't think pet peeve is the right word. I would say more of a quibble. Lauren is a very analog person, I will say, and I have a lot of respect for it. But I think she thinks if she writes it in her day planner, that somehow I know about it. It's
Like-
sort of this mental telepathy that I think she thinks happens, but doesn't, and it often causes some tumult.
Wait. So writing it in like by hand in a day timer.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying she thinks that right. You could just have a shared calendar.
It doesn't exist.
Right,
We
got it.
do. We do have one. It's
Right.
just, are we going to use it? And we don't.
Okay, can I do my 2 pet peeves? Because I
Yes.
practice mine.
I authorize this.
Thank you. My first pet peeve about Steve is he fills the Brita water filter too full. So when I go to get the pitcher of water out of the fridge, we do have a water dispenser as well. But I go to pull it out, it comes
It's
out.
spilling.
Yeah, and I think to myself, like less is more in this scenario. Not like a lot less, but like an inch. We don't have to go all the way to the top. Okay. Second one is women of a certain age don't sleep great at night. Okay. That's just like, this is a phase of life. It's so awesome. It's so great. And this is one of the many benefits is that we don't sleep well. And Steve can snore on occasion, but that's not my pet peeve. The dog makes a lot of noise at night, and I really just prefer not to have him in the bedroom. I mean, you would think it was child abuse. Steve like sneaks him in, and like I hear him at 4 a.m, like licking his paw, and I'm wide awake. So sorry. Okay,
Well,
I digress.
Not
I
as
digress.
not as exciting because Ari's not here to defend herself, but we have a cat. And it's the same thing, although there's really no way to get a cat out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
That cat will scratch at the pillow in the middle of the night, meowing, like coming and going. And if I try to say, like, can we just not have the cat on the bed? No way. That's just not, like,
It's
Ari would
child
lose her
abuse.
she'd lose
Yeah.
her mind.
Yeah. So yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Got it.
that's one of them.
Noted.
He knows already, but let's see how it goes. Why I do know the answer to a lot of these. Hold on, of course. What podcast are you currently listening to besides Keaton?
Besides Keaton.
I would say every once in a while I go back to How We Built This. But I'm not a big podcast person, actually.
You've been listening to books.
Yeah, audiobook like a fiend.
Yeah.
All right, so give me a book.
All the Michael Connolly books, the Harry Bosch books, Lincoln Lawyer books, like there's like 25 or 30 of them, and I've
So you love the
gone
fiction
through
stuff.
most of them. What's that?
Fiction.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Mm-hmm. Who would play you in a movie?
My God. Has to be some unknown character actor that I can't think of, but can I pass on that one? That's hard for some reason.
Okay. Max, you can pick the last one.
All right, let me see here. These are definitely some of Brent's classics on here. All right, this is sort of for both of you guys. What's your current favorite vacation spot?
We need to discover a new one. I would say my personal favorite vacation spot is still Bethany Beach. Like my temperature goes down, my heart rate slows, like until people show up on 4th of July. But I walk into our little place there and I open the sliders and I'm like, this is great. Like
The easy life.
yeah, it's just, there's something about it. I don't know. We've shared that for a long time. And ever since I've known Lauren, like the first time I came to the East Coast, I think, it was the second time, I drove her car from the airport to Bethany Beach and walked into the condo full of people barbecuing out on the terrace. And I'll always remember that. But
This is a California boy coming to Delaware.
I didn't even know they had beaches in Delaware, right? Honestly. So I'll always remember that. And that'll always just have, it's not so much about the place, it's just the place in your heart.
Nice.
Well, we have different favorite vacation spots, so that might be a problem, right? So in recent years, Cape Cod has trumped Bethany for me.
Interesting.
Because for one very specific reason is I can really unplug there because there are no people from here. And it's just that when we're in Bethany, we run into a lot of the same people from home, which is lovely and wonderful and great, but it doesn't feel like as much of a break for me as when we go to Cape Cod. My best friend has a house there, and I just feel, I love it. It's so beautiful and just sort of, it's not as densely populated. So that would be my go-to.
Great. Steve, Lauren, thanks so much for coming down today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for sharing, and have a great one.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening to Keyed In with your hosts, Max and Brent, unlocking the minds of the industry's top real estate professionals. For more information on selling your home, find us online at KeyedInPodcast.com. Remember to subscribe to Keyed In on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Keyed In Podcast, at Rabin Max, and at Brent E. Jackson. And follow Max on TikTok at MaxwellRabin_properties.